I was very young, I think I was drawn in a way to our history and the stories of our past and the memories of our past, and over time I became increasingly convinced of their value and of their importance, and felt, I suppose, some sense of obligation to record and to document those stories and make sure that they weren't lost. And particularly in relation to an experience like the War of Independence, that memory is not only important, it's actually critical to our understanding of that time, because the War of Independence, or the time of the Tens, is not just a landmark in our national historical consciousness, but it's actually a landmark for our local people, for our local places, because for the people who went through that period, for the people who suffered, for the people who fought, the memories endured.
But I know the time of the Tens, it was an awful time. God, you wouldn't know the hour of the night. They'd knock on the door and they'd come in and search your house, and if there was a spark of light seen, the windows had to be barricaded, covered up, no light to be seen. Oh, God, it took an awful effect on them, it did. My father's head broke down that time. Oh, you'd be afraid of your life, sure. And the 10 or 12 lorries go from Innisdiamond down to Innis every morning. And they'd be banging shots at both sides.
The Black and Tans have seared their way into the consciousness of the Irish people, and there are different understandings of them. From a historical point of view, they were former British soldiers in the main who had served as servicemen in the First World War, who returned and who wouldn't or couldn't settle into normal civilian life, and who in early 1920 were recruited very hastily into a mobile, heavily armed police strike force, sent into Ireland to support the RIC in suppressing the IRA and its supporters in the Republican movement generally. They were an ill-defined and very ill-disciplined unit, and because of their behaviour, very quickly it became the belief that they were men who were released from jails and lunatic asylums. And given the way that they behaved for the 15 months that they were active in Ireland, that characterisation is very understandable. When you consider the way that the Black and Tans were recruited, the way in which they were directed into Ireland at a time of unprecedented political turmoil, and you consider the way in which they were empowered to roam through the country with very little discipline, you can see how that was a powder keg waiting to explode.
The evening that Helens beat up my grandfather and my granduncle Michael. Michael was his brother-in-law.
That's Michael Young, isn't it?
Michael Young, yeah. When they were coming home, they were coming up the Fecal Road, they're near my hands. The Tens were actually on their way down the Fecal Road. They struck my grandfather into the face with a butt of a rifle and smashed his jaw. And I hammered him and kicked him while he was on the ground. But Michael tried to help him, and they struck Michael with the butt of a rifle, and when Michael fell, one of them stood, his arm went out like that, and one of them stood on him. It stood on his arm, and another stood on his back. And they got the butt of the rifle and they smashed his arm again and again and again with the butt of the rifle. And when I was a little lad, I used to spend a lot of my time with my granduncle. I used to notice his arm. Even when he hadn't his sleeves turned up, it was like a sickle, like that. The doctors were never able to get his arm straightened out. They were able to save it all right, but they could never get it straight. So that his arm was bent over like a sickle.
The IRA and the Republican movement generally throughout this entire time was very closely aligned to cultural and geographical identity. So in most cases, the IRA companies, battalions and brigades and the Cumann brigades were comprised of local people who in the main operated in local areas. And that added a huge dimension to the experience, because you not only had people fighting for a cause, but you had them fighting for that cause in their local place. And what that means for memory is that when you try and access those stories are intermingled with pride, with association, with an understanding that cannot be achieved in many ways within conventional records. So an archival record may refer to a local place in County Clare, but the memory can actually understand that place, it can understand those events and the people involved. So the IRA, in the context of the memory of that time, have to be understood according to the connection to those places. They were in the main young men from those local places who believed in Irish independence. Many of them inherited the tradition from people before them. They weren't angels. Like any association of mortal men, you have good and bad. But when you were facing the combined British Imperial forces during that period, angels wouldn't be much use to you at that time.
They were, outside of my father now, in general, they were a tough race of people. And I have done a fair bit of travelling in my time. And I would say they were a unique race of people. They were tough. They could go for a long time. I would say one thing there's a body of men there in a photograph. I would like to have them behind me if I was in a tight corner. They weren't afraid of anything. And on top of that, too, they weren't maybe the nicest people in the world to their wives and families. They were kind of born wild, if you like. But they were harming, real harming. I remember going to fairs with him in Milltown, like, you know. It was damn seldom you came out of a fair without a row. And they didn't go back from anybody.
Did you ever see your own father in a row at a fair?
Oh, yes, I saw him a few times in action. And they could handle themselves, let's put it that way.
Did he maintain his kind of Republican beliefs?
Right to the last. Right to the last.
I've had the privilege over the last 2 decades to sit with hundreds of people across the county and across the country and to record their memories, their oral tradition, their understanding of the experience of the War of Independence. And it brings a much deeper and a much more rounded understanding of the overall period and the experience of that time. And in some times, and in some cases, it's a greater understanding of what that experience was like, the emotion of it, the human experience of it. At other times, the memory can transport you directly to the moments of a battle or the moments after a battle. You take Millie Enright, who I had the privilege of recording back in her native Kilmihil, and she remembered being a 6-year-old girl in April 1920. In the moments after shots were fired in her village, and those shots ended up in the deaths of 2 people, including one local IRA volunteer called Sean Breen. Millie remembered the shots. She remembered looking out of her window in her home as a 6-year-old girl and seeing British soldiers running past her window with guns in their arms, heading towards the scene of the shooting. The memory of that period is so critical in opening up a pathway to the human impact of that time. You know, archival records are hugely important. They give us statistics and information. Memory can go much deeper into the actual echoes of those events, to the echoes of those records. Tom Brennan was recorded in Chicago in 2010.
There were 6 in the family, and I was the only one born in a nursing home. And this was because the black and tans paraded my aunt's house where my mother was in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was due to be born 3 days later. So they flashed the flashlight and she got a stroke or paralysis. She lost the power of all her left side. So I never saw my mother walk, but she could get around with the aid of a chair. And I was the only one, as I say, born in a nursing home. My brothers and sisters were all born in 6 Mile Bridge, County Clare.
Well, the book represents, a sample of the people that I've been privileged to record over the last 2 decades. And whenever I started recording those people, it was according to a very simple impulse, the feeling and the sense of duty that those people should be recorded. Their memories should be recorded and should be part of the way we understand our past. And I suppose it's only sometimes when something is gone that you really appreciate its value. And looking back now, I suppose at this point, a lot of the people whose stories are now in the book have gone to their God. Well, if you take Catherine Talty, who was born on the 4th of April 1916, or you take May Toohey, who was born just over a month later on the 24th of May 1916, those 2 women lived through that experience. They also lived through the birth and the development of the Irish Republic for the following 100 years. Unless their stories and unless their memories form part of how we tell our history, unless they form part of our nation's story, then that story is incomplete.